If you do video, say for YouTube or just your own personal stuff, then it may be the case that you've played around with the color of your video. Out of camera, such as it looks like right now, you may think, well, it looks okay, but you may decide to play around with the colors, saturation, brightness of the image, and turn into something like this. And without a color checker, it can be tricky to turn into something like this, which looks much nicer, doesn't it? So today I'm going to show you how to color correct and color grade your images in an accurate and aesthetically pleasing way so that your videos look that much better. And it's without a color checker. Let's get to it. Okay, so as you can now see, I'm in DaVinci Resolve. This is my main editing program, and today I'm using the free version so that you can follow along at home regardless of what editor you use. Now, these steps can also be done in something like Premiere or Final Cut. However, some of them are a bit more tailored to my workflow in DaVinci, and you may have to adjust them slightly to account for that. Let's go over to the Color tab, because in DaVinci Resolve, that's where all the color starts. Now, to give you a bit of information about this video that you are seeing, this is 4K video off of a Sony a7R III, and the picture profile is HLG3. So, for the purpose of the video, I am not using any correction LUTs. Any LUTs at all, actually. However, if you want to simplify things for yourself and have a little less control over the image, then that may be an easier way to do it for you. However, if you want as much control over the image as you can get, then I recommend doing it all from scratch. Depending on your picture profile or type of log that you are using, it may be super difficult, if not near impossible, to do it from scratch, in which case you may want a correction LUT, but it's up to you. So let's start off with step number 1. I usually sharpen my image first. There's really no reason not to do it first, and after you do it, you don't have to go check on it again, so I just like to get it out of the way. So to do this in DaVinci Resolve, we are going to go down here and click on the Sharpen and Blur tab. Now, it will automatically be set to blur. I don't know why, because it's much more common that people sharpen their video than blur it, but you just have to click the blur button up here and select sharpen instead. Now, to sharpen the image, all I do is 1 or 2 down scrolls over the radius controls, and then occasionally up the level a little bit, and it's sharper. To see this in action, we can go to 200%. It zoomed in on his shirt, which is a perfect place to check the sharpness because there's text, and you can see if I put the radius back up to its normal position, it's less sharp. If I do 2 down scrolls, that was 3, that's 2, then it's much sharper. Now, in some cases, 2 might be too much. You might want only 1, and in fact, between those, we can see a huge difference. And the 0.44, which is the second down scroll, might even be too sharp. So I'm gonna set it to 0.47 for now, and just leave it there. The next thing I do is add saturation. Now, I specifically do this before contrast, because if you add contrast before saturation, then you might end up adding too much contrast, or sometimes even too little, just because of the way your eye perceives contrast and saturation together. Of course, if you prefer to do contrast first and then add saturation and maybe make some adjustments later, which we might end up having to do anyway, it's totally up to you. This is just my process. I've actually been color grading in DaVinci for almost 2 years and have found a process that I like to use and that I think gets good results. So that's how I prefer to do it. So there's several ways to add saturation to an image, but my favorite is just going down to the wheels window here. I like to select log wheels, and then I just drag the saturation bar up. Depending on your picture profile, it may vary where you drag it. I usually drag it just below 70, maybe about there looks good. And I'm just doing this by eye. I don't have a calibrated monitor even, so color checking later on using the tools that DaVinci gives you will be important, and we will be making adjustments later. Since we're going to make adjustments later, I may even, you know what, I will do it. I will drag the saturation up past what I would normally put it so that I can just see the color better, even if it's slightly inaccurate on my display. Now that we have saturation, I like to add contrast, and to do this, I like to do it in the curves. So I just go to the curves tab down here and make a simple S-curve. And again, I just do this by eye. I check and adjust all later down the road since I don't have a color checker or a calibrated monitor. That looks pretty good to me, so let's move on to step number 4, which is exposure. Now, even though we have contrast to our liking, that doesn't mean that exposure will be correct. So to check exposure, I come over here to the scopes and I select histogram. Histogram gives me a great view of my exposure and allows me to base it off of something scientific that the program is seeing instead of what my eyes seeing through my inaccurate display. You can also do this through parades. Sometimes I like to use both, or waveforms also is a good way to check that. I'll leave it in waveforms for now and base it off of this. You can see that we have some clipping up here in the whites, because that's at the 1023, and the shadows are almost touching 0 but aren't clipped. Now, if you don't know how to read a waveform, histogram, parades, or anything like that, just look up a video on YouTube. There are lots of them out there. So to adjust exposure, I usually just use curves. I'm going to take the highlights down a bit since that's what we see we need to do in the waveforms, and now those aren't clipping. And I'm going to bring shadows down a bit just to remain that contrast. And now we're actually looking pretty good. We see that a lot of the exposure is right around that midpoint, which is correct. Though it does see a lot of the colored lights on the backdrop, so I may actually raise the highlights up a tad as well as the midtones to account for that, because the lights are brighter than his skin. Now I'm going to refine the previous 4, or was that 5 steps? I've lost count now. And continue looking at the different scopes to make sure that everything's okay so far. So we just accounted for the waveform scopes to make sure contrast and exposure is okay. I'll go to histogram just to double check and make sure that that agrees, and it looks like it does, though there is this spike down here at the shadows, which I will raise up just a tad. And now I can check my vector scope for saturation, and it appears that we might have a little bit too much saturation, which was actually my intention, so I will leave it there for now. Now I start adjusting color and correcting it. The first thing I do is correct my white balance. There are a couple ways to do this. You have a temperature and tint slider down here at the color wheels. If you click on the second button here, then you see temp and tint, and you can do it manually through there. However, to ensure that I get a good result, I like to click on the white balance dropper they give us and click on something neutral. In this case, his shirt should be neutral as it is only under white lights, whereas the background, though it is white, has colored lights on it and therefore might be somewhat inaccurate. And as you can see, that seems to have done a pretty good job, and I trust it for now, but we will check in the next step that it did an okay job, because we are going to test skin tones, and there's an easy scientific way to adjust these to be correct. What you want to do for skin tones is go down to the scopes, make sure you're in the vector scope, and you can adjust based on skin tone line. If you don't see a skin tone line, like I don't see here, then you can click on these sliders that represent the settings, and there's a little option that says Show Skin Tone Indicator. You click on that, then you can just click away and you can see we now have the skin tone line. Now, we have all these different colors, though there is a blob right next to the skin tone line. But to make sure that these other colors aren't interfering with our adjustment of the image based on skin tones, I'm just going to go to the mask here, select the pen tool, and create a mask around a portion of his skin. It doesn't have to be large. I like to get a good large portion of it though, so that I have lots of information to go off of. Now, as you can see, this only masked off the color grade. You can see based on the reduced saturation and everything here. However, I want to actually remove the rest of the image except what's in the mask. So I'm going to right click over here by the node, click Add Alpha Output, and drag a line between those, which allows for transparency in this node. Now we can see that our skin tones are quite off actually. We see this little dot of color near the skin tones line, but not on it. So there are several ways to adjust this. You can do it in curves, which I like to do just fine-tune adjustments in there, but I mainly use temp and temperature. Temperature generally will just increase or decrease the saturation of the skin tones, since it is adjusting the yellow versus blue line, which is almost right along the skin tone line. You can see that it's in between yellow and red, and increasing the temperature will add more yellowy orange, and decreasing it will add more blue, which is practically on the other side of the skin tone line. So I'm just going to increase that a little bit to get a bit more saturation in the skin tones. And now adjust the tint, which you see moves it from side to side, and already I'm on the skin tones line. Now, if we remove the mask, you might see that the image doesn't look great. You can see it's quite purpley. So what we can do is reduce some of that tint and refine the correction another way. We can re-enable the mask, go over to curves, click on the second curves tab, which is hue versus hue, and now we can adjust the skin tones only here and adjust their tint, or more specifically, their hue. So what I'm going to do is just put points along this graph so that I have reference points go off of exactly at 0, 0 at each hue, and add a point right about here so that it doesn't quite affect red, but affects orange, which is in between the yellow and red. And now, ensuring that I'm looking at my vector scope while I'm doing this, I can make some adjustments to there to adjust the hue. Now, you see as I drag this up and down, I'm not getting much adjustment, if any, which means we just have to expand the hues which it is affecting. So I'll just drag this a bit closer to red. I don't think that that big red spike are the skin tones, though I could be wrong. And sure enough, we still aren't seeing a lot of variance. So I can try dragging the yellow out towards green. Doesn't really give us much more. So I will drag this over the spike of red, and now we are seeing a difference. It's subtle, but it is there. So I'm going to drag that up to fix the hue. And now when I go back, disenable the mask, you can see it's looking pretty good, and we saw that the skin tone indicator showed us that our skin tones were correct. And that essentially is how you get accurate color, at least on the skin tones, without a good monitor or a color checker. But we aren't done yet. See, this is now color corrected, and we can go back and check all of our scopes to make sure that that is the case. But it's not color graded, because color grading is the creative side of color adjustment. Color correction is the more scientific, this is correct color, that color correction is how you get it to that correct color, and color grading is your creative side after that. So this is a super simple set, really. There are just two main colors behind the subject, which are purple and blue. Not much happening in the scene color-wise. In fact, I might increase the saturation a little bit, way higher than I anticipated, but looking at our vector scope and our CIE chromacy, it doesn't seem super over the top, whereas it would if I were to drag it all the way to 100. We can see what that looks like on the vector scope here, just too much. So I dial it back to about there, which is 83.3 in my case. So anyway, to add extra spice, what I like to do is go back to the curves and specifically go to hue versus saturation. This allows me to adjust the saturation of different hues. So you'll see if I add some points here, if I wanted to make the reds super saturated in this image, I can drag it up like that. You see his skin looks awful. It's just nasty. I don't want to do that. What I do want to increase, though, are the purples and teal turquoises of the image. To do that, I'm going to place a point here and here for those blues. You can see pretty big difference there. And in fact, I may want to remove that and go just based off this. I like it about there. And then do the same thing with the magentas. So I will put a point here so that I don't affect the reds too much, and drag this up as well. Now I can also play around with the hue versus luminance. Because these are, oh, you know what? looking at the image more carefully, I think that those purples are too much, and I want to dial them back to about there. Anyway, going back to hue versus luminance, I can actually bring the luminance of those blues down a bit if I want, which looks like that at the extreme, but just looks like that if I reduce it a little bit. And I can do the same with the purples, though because they look slightly dimmer than the blues, I may want to actually raise them a little bit, like that. And generally, that's pretty much all I do for this type of scene where I'm in the studio and I don't want things to really pop. It's not supposed to be super cinematic. If I were color grading some sort of short film or really anything of the sort, I would probably take the color grading further, adjust hues of certain elements in the image, and make it look more cinematic. But from here, I just refine again, double check my vector scopes, and well, not just vector scopes, all my scopes, and make sure everything is how I want it to be. That is step number 9, by the way. I'm going to do that quickly and then I will return. Okay, I didn't end up affecting much. I increased the brightness of the midtones a little bit, I reduced the temperature a little bit, and I think I reduced the saturation a little bit. But now, the final step, now that we have it exactly how we want, is creating a LUT out of it, so that when we have a scene like this again, with the same settings and same picture profile and everything, we can just do a one-click, boom, color grade. That way we don't have to go through all 10 steps again. Well, I guess it would be 9, but you get the gist of it. So to do that, I'm going to go down here to my different clips, right-click on this, generate 3D LUT, 65 point cube, and name it what I want. I will name this Sony HLG Studio Grade for video, if I can type. And now we're all done. If I were to import similar footage, such as what we see in this video, and drag that into my timeline, go to color, select that clip. This was actually filmed the same day as this one, so I know it will be a perfect match. I can go here to the LUTs tab, find the one I created, which is right here, drag that on, and boom, it's done. And we can probably see that even with my skin tones, as I appear in this video, that it still works. So we can confirm that by drawing a mask around my skin, like so. It doesn't have to be this complicated really, but whatever. Again, add alpha output, drag the line like that. Look at our vector scope and we can see that is right on the line. So, hopefully this video helped you, taught you about color grading and everything. Please consider liking, commenting, and if you want to see our future videos, consider subscribing down below. If you want to keep watching right now, click on this video right here, which YouTube recommended for you, so you should like it.